Okay, Mike with Available Technology, and let's get building our computer. We went through what the components are, so now we're going to start assembling the components into the chassis. So here's our case, or our chassis. I went ahead and removed both the front and the back covers. The covers that were on the case have been taken off. Those are usually held in place by a couple of thumb screws like this. There's two on each side. I went ahead and pulled those off so we could get into this thing pretty easily. A couple of notes about cases and computers in general. Somebody once told me that it's as easy as putting Legos together to build a computer. And to a degree that's true, but only if the Legos conduct electricity and cost about $1,000. So you do need to be a little more careful than putting your Legos together when you build a computer. But really it is just snapping components in where they belong and being careful while you do it. A couple things to note. One is when you're building a computer, you always want to be grounded. So electricity or static electricity can destroy computer components. I've never had much trouble with this myself, but it's always a good practice to touch something metal to discharge any static electricity you might have on your body. Touch something metal so it's discharged before you pick up any computer components. So that's rule number one. Rule number two, with cases, usually your case itself will come with some hardware. This is a screwless case, so it uses these to mount the drives, and we'll look at that in a second. But it comes with all the screws you need to put the motherboard and all that in. There's typically two kinds of screws. There's a larger screw and a smaller screw. The larger ones are for things like your hard drive and for your power supply. The smaller ones are for the motherboard most of the time. It's kind of hard to mess this up because the small ones won't fit. And the big ones, if you try to put those in a small hole, they're not going to fit, and if you try to put the small ones in the big hole, they won't fit, so it's not that tough to do. Okay, I like to mount the hardware that's standing in the case first. To me, that's easier to do. So we're going to be mounting our hard drive, we're going to mount our CD-ROM drive, or DVD-ROM drive, and we're going to mount the power supply before we do anything with the motherboard or any of the other components. So might as well start with the CD-ROM drive. Most of these cases come with a slot already punched out. This one has a hole right here, just conveniently placed for us to put our DVD-ROM drive in. Now, since sometimes you'll use screws to hold this case doesn't use screws, so I'm going to turn this, and it just pops right out, basically. When we put it back in, it's going to lock into these screw holes, and then we turn it, it locks it into the case. So all I got to do is basically take this DVD-ROM, find my hole there, and go ahead and slide that in, and line it up on the front so it's nice and flush. And then as I go over here to the side, you'll see the holes line up right there. So I can take the screwless latch and just put it in those holes where the screws would go, and then just give it a turn. And when I do that, it locks it in, so that cannot come out. Okay, so there's one piece already mounted. That was easy. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in our hard drive. Hard drive, you want to be careful not to drop the thing. They're kind of expensive, but otherwise they're pretty easy to install. This particular case installs with the connectors. There's the connectors on the hard drive. There's one for the power and one for the data. So we've got power connector, and this is called a SATA connector. These sometimes, most of the time, they'll face toward the front of the case, like out towards you, but this particular one mounts this way. But whichever way your case is, you can mount it that way. So this is the same kind of situation. I've got the screwless mounting system here, so I'm going to turn, let me just put it in the top. I'm going to unscrew that. It pops right out. We're going to take our drive, and because this one faces with the connectors back, I'm going to put it into the slot and just push it back until I see the holes line up. So if you look on the side, you see I pushed it in until the holes lined up right there. We can take our screwless mounting system here, get it into those holes, give it a twist, and there you go. We just mounted our hard drive. So this hard drive is going to sit right there, and then when we connect it, our power and our data are going to go on this side. And we're not quite to that yet. You'll see this case has a lot of cables. All cases have this. Let me tell you what these are just to run through them real quick. These ones are for fans inside the case. They have green lit fans to go with the accent green on the case. So that's what those are. This is more LED right here. These will plug into your power supply. We're just going to put those out of the way for a second. We've got some other ones here. Probably, to me, the hardest thing about building a computer is plugging in these little cables. These are labeled. Most of the time you'll see this one's labeled power switch, this one's labeled reset switch, and this one's labeled HDD LED or hard disk LED. So when your disk is used, when it's in use, it flashes an LED on the front of your computer. We'll connect those later as well. This is just a 10 position switch with one blocked out. This is a USB connector. This plugs in your motherboard, and it provides USB to these two USB front ports up here. That's what that's for. And then the last thing in this case is for audio. This is to connect the front case audio. This has audio connectors right here on this case. That's what this is for. So all these things connect to the motherboard when the time is right. These things just connect to power, so the lights will come on when we want them to. Alright, next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in the power supply. The power supply is this guy right here. We've got a pretty good 600 watt power supply. Everything that the computer needs to get power to the motherboard, the video card, everything is in this big bundle. But we got to mount this in the case. Now you may already have a case with this that came with this already mounted, and that's fine. We just have a special power supply that's a little more higher powered. We're going to mount that one ourselves. So how do you mount it? Where does it go? Most of the time they go in the top of the case. This particular one goes at the bottom. Your case could do either, but obviously you see the hole. That's the right size for this to go into. And we're going to put this in from the inside. Also make sure you don't put it in upside down. Like this particular case has vent holes at the bottom, so we want this fan to point toward those holes. So I'm going to flip it like this. Get these out of the way. This is going to mount into the case. Just like that. We'll get our screw holes to line up, and then we'll screw that down. But that's where it's going to mount, and then the power from the wall is going to connect here. This will power the computer all the way through to the motherboard, and then we'll be able to use it and fire it up. So that's where our power supply is going to mount. I'm not going to mount that yet. Ordinarily I would do that next, but I want you to get a good look at where the motherboard is going to go. When you mount the motherboard, the only thing you really need to know about motherboard mounting, there's two things. One thing is cases come with standoffs. That's what these little things are. They keep the motherboard away from this metal or aluminum plate, so there's no contact or no shorting. So it comes with a lot of these installed. You just want to make sure that your particular motherboard, wherever your holes are for your mounting of your motherboard, and you can find them because they got the little welds around them, that those match up with these. I've already made sure that's the case on this computer. If I were to put this in here and match them up, you can see that I've got a hole here, I've got a standoff here, I got a hole here and a standoff here, so those all match up perfectly. If you get one in the middle of the case, in the middle of your motherboard somewhere, it could cause a short. So you just want to make sure you remove any of these that aren't necessary. Make sure that all the ones in there will line up with your motherboard. So that's the first thing to remember, get those standoffs right. The second thing to remember is that every motherboard comes with a bezel. The bezel is the part that goes back here, so your components can poke through from your motherboard. When you install your motherboard like this on the back of the computer, it needs to go through this bezel so it shields your components from dirt, debris, or any type of static discharge. So what we're going to do is make sure we get this bezel installed correctly. These are really easy to put in, but a lot of people get confused and try to put them in from the outside. That doesn't work, so we got to put it in from the inside out. And basically put it in here. Give it a little push, and it should lock right into place for us, just like that. Now when we put our motherboard in, the components on the back of the motherboard are going to slide right through there. So let me show you how to mount this motherboard. We're going to turn it on its side. Hopefully we'll still be able to see. So motherboard mounting goes into the case in this direction, and it should just slide right into those slots on the bezel that we just installed. And the standoffs should be right under the places where our screws are going to go, right there. So these are all lined up. If you look at the back of the case, see that bezel where we installed it, and see that the components of the motherboard went right through there and they're lined up perfectly. I'm going to put one screw in here just to hold it. So make sure you have a screwdriver. If your case comes with these little paper washers, go ahead and use those. Just put your screw right through it, and before you screw it down to the motherboard, put one of those washers on first. And this will be enough to hold it in while we continue to work. Once this motherboard is installed and all the screws are in, then we can start adding other components, like our processor. We're going to go ahead and put the processor in now. The processor goes into this slot here, which has a cool little lever system that holds it down to make sure that it doesn't move at all. Each one of these in here is little tiny pins. We don't want to touch those if we don't have to. But we are going to go ahead and pop off this little retention. So when you pop that off and lift it up, it raises this up for us, and then it's ready for it to receive the processor. So let me grab that. Let me find it. There it went. So here's our Intel processor that we're going to be installing, and we've got our socket all ready for it. If you look at the processor, typically the processor is going to have some notches in it. There's a notch right there and a notch right there. That will tell you that you're putting it in correctly, because there's really only one way it can go. If we look at the slot, there's a notch right there and a notch right there. So usually face up, it's going to drop right into those slots, and you can jiggle it around a little bit, make sure it's good and tight. Drop this back down. Lift this, and you want this little slot here to go under our retention bolt, and then we just push that all the way down, lock it under, and the processor is now installed. It's as easy as that. We're going to go ahead and put the fan on now. This is just a stock Intel fan. There's lots of different fans you can do. You can do water cooling, some really cool stuff. We're just going to use the stock one, because this is what most people would be using. It uses these little rings, but these little screws here to tighten them up. So what we're going to be doing is pushing these plastic pins through the motherboard, and then we're going to be turning this with a screwdriver to lock them in. So if you look at the processor, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 holes that are going to line up perfectly with this fan. You just get them started in there. There they go, they're started. I'm going to take my screwdriver, and I'm just going to go to each of these and press down. I'm going to feel it pop in, and then I'm going to turn it. So there's one. We want to go opposite sides, typically. So I'm going to push this one down. You should hear a snap, and then turn it. And I'll lock that one in. And then here we're going to push down, give it a turn. Same thing over here. Give it a turn. And our fan is now locked onto our processor. We got one power connector. I'm not going to plug any of these power connectors in quite yet. Okay, so we got the motherboard mounted, our processor's in, the hard drive, and our DVD-ROM. Next thing we're going to do is put in our memory, or our RAM. Here's our two memory modules. This is G-Skill gaming memory we're going to put in this motherboard. So like I said before, these have a slot in them right here. That slot will coincide with that little red tab there. So you can't put them in backwards. It's impossible. If you try, it just won't work. If I try to put it in this way, you can see how far off. I got a little red tab here, and my opening is here, so there's no way it'll fit. But if I flip it, it lines up just right. Got to pull these little tabs back, pull all 4 of those back, and you'll see in the center it's just going to go straight down into that slot, straight down in, press it on both ends, snap, snap. Same thing with this one. We're going to find where it lines up, slide it straight down in, little push here, you'll see the little retention clip, and same thing on the other side. There we go. Alright, we got those in. Now it looks like one of the last things we need to install before we start doing our power connectors is our display adapter. So this is our video card that we're using. It's a fairly decent card. It has takes up 2 slots in the back of the computer, and it connects via this PCI Express slot, and that's this slot right here. So essentially what we're going to do is slide it right down into that slot and lock it in, and then we'll be ready to start powering things up. We got to look at our case though, because we got to make sure that we have 2 slots open. Right now I only have 1 open. These slots right here, some of these will just push out the top. Some of them have to be pushed and broken out. Looks like this one we're going to break out. So let me go ahead and pull that out of there. Make sure we don't snap that off there. And now we should be ready to put in our video card. So I'm going to put it in as close as we can get to the edge, and make sure we're lined up with our red slot down there. See our red slot? So now we pull this through as far as we can, and we're getting ready to push it down. If you can see that.